Welcome to Mindful Moments, where
Yeah.
we like to serve up some brain food in bite-sized portions. Ever feel like the world's kind of stuck on repeat? Like history's rhyming more than it's evolving. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into The Road to Unfreedom by historian Timothy Snyder.
Great book.
It unpacks recent political history in Russia, Europe, and the U.S., and it might just change how you see the world.
It's a fascinating book. One of the things that really struck me was this idea that we're shifting from a politics of inevitability to a politics of eternity.
Okay, break that down for me. Politics of inevitability versus politics of eternity.
So, for a lot of the 20th century, people believed in progress, right? Like we were moving towards a better future.
Right.
But now we're seeing all these narratives popping up that kind of twist history, They deny the truth, and it all boils down to keeping certain people in power.
So instead of like striving for a better tomorrow, we're just supposed to accept the present. And the past is just a tool for those in control.
Yeah, it's a little unsettling when you think about it.
It is.
And Snyder uses Putin's Russia as a prime example of how this politics of eternity plays out in the real world.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example of this whole like manipulating history thing.
So Snyder talks about how Putin uses this event, the conversion to Christianity of Volodymyr, sometimes called Valdemar, this medieval ruler, way back in 988.
Okay.
And he uses this to justify Russia taking Crimea,
Wow.
claiming it's like this mystical return to a glorious past. But in doing that, he just ignores like centuries of history
Yeah.
and the fact that Ukraine has its own unique history.
So it's not about being accurate. It's just about controlling the narrative.
Exactly. It's about twisting the past to fit your agenda.
It's scary how effective that can be.
It is. And what's even more concerning is that this whole politics of eternity thing, it's not just a Russia thing anymore.
Wait, hold on. You're saying it's spreading.
It is.
That's kind of scary, to be honest.
It is a bit.
Yeah.
Think about it. Does the future feel less certain to you these days? Is there a stronger pull towards nostalgia, this longing for a simpler past?
Actually, yeah, now that you mention it, it's like we're constantly bombarded with messages about how things were better back then, but were they really? Or is that just like a carefully constructed narrative?
That's the politics of eternity at work, It preys on our anxieties and our desire for easy answers. And to understand how it works, we need to look at Putin's Russia. Snyder calls it a masterclass in manipulation.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What tactics does Snyder expose?
Well, he shows how Putin and his allies, they use this combination of historical narratives and symbolism, cultural anxieties even, to solidify their power and justify their actions.
Okay.
And it goes beyond rewriting history. Sometimes they just straight up manufacture it.
Wait, manufacture history, like they make stuff up.
I wish I was kidding. Snyder talks about this chilling example. It's called the crucifixion.
Crucifixion.
It was this completely fabricated story about a child being crucified by Ukrainian nationalists.
Oh, wow.
And this was spread by Russian media to demonize the West, and to justify their aggression in Ukraine.
I'm speechless. They just invented an atrocity. How do people believe that?
I know. It's scary how effective it can be.
Wow.
Even though it was later debunked, the story served its purpose, It stirred up emotions, it painted this clear enemy, and it provided justification for violence. It all feeds into this idea of a timeless struggle, which is exactly what the politics of eternity is all about.
That is seriously disturbing. And we're not talking about old school propaganda leaflets here. This is happening in the digital age.
Exactly. It spreads through TV, social media, and what's even more insidious is this tactic called implausible deniability.
Implausible deniability. Okay. You have to explain that one. What does that even mean?
Well, think about it. Putin and his allies constantly deny obvious truths, even when there's overwhelming evidence.
Right.
They deny Russia's involved in Ukraine. They deny interfering in elections, you name it. And it's this calculated tactic, to create confusion, to erode trust in reliable sources, and ultimately to control the narrative. If nothing can be trusted, then their version of reality starts to seem more plausible.
So it's not just about spreading lies. It's about undermining the very idea of truth itself.
You got it.
That's terrifyingly effective.
It is. And when truth loses its meaning, people become vulnerable. They're searching for answers, for something to hold on to in this sea of uncertainty.
So if people can't trust the facts, if everything feels like it's up for grabs, where do they turn? Who or what fills that void?
Often they turn to those who offer simple, emotionally satisfying narratives. Leaders who promise a return to this mythical past, a sense of belonging, and someone to blame for all their problems.
It's like offering a security blanket in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and out of control.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's a powerful cocktail, especially for those who are disillusioned with the present and scared of the future. And that's why the politics of eternity is so dangerous. It preys on our deepest fears and desires, offering this false comfort while undermining the very foundations of a free and open society.
Okay, so we see how this plays out in Russia. But where does Ukraine fit into all of this? Because they seem to be right at the heart of this struggle.
Oh, absolutely. Ukraine becomes this battleground between the politics of inevitability and the politics of eternity. And a key moment in this fight was the Maidan protests back in 2013 and 2014. Remember those?
Yeah, those images were all over the news. Huge crowds in Kyiv, clashes with police, a real sense of urgency and defiance.
That was Ukrainians resisting the politics of eternity. Initially, they were protesting for closer ties with Europe, a very future-oriented goal, right?
Right.
But it quickly became a fight for their present, their right to self-determination,
Right.
against Russian-backed forces that wanted to drag them back into their sphere of influence.
So they were literally fighting for their right to choose a different path, to shape their own future, instead of having it dictated by this, eternal Russia narrative.
Exactly. They were rejecting the idea that their destiny was preordained, that they were somehow bound to Russia by this mystical connection to the past. They were fighting for the right to make their own choices, to build a future based on their own aspirations, not the ones imposed upon them.
That's incredibly powerful. But if this politics of eternity is so potent, how did Ukrainians manage to resist it? What gave them the strength to stand up and say no to this seemingly seductive narrative?
That's what makes the Maidan protests so fascinating. It was a testament to the power of hope, the belief in a better future,
Right.
the willingness to fight for it. Ukrainians saw the danger of the politics of eternity, and they chose to resist, even when facing incredible danger and uncertainty.
So in a way, Maidan was a victory for politics of inevitability, a sign that people still yearn for progress and are willing to risk everything for it.
Yeah, you could definitely see it that way. The Maidan was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even facing huge odds, people can resist the pull of the past and fight for a future they create themselves.
It's incredibly inspiring. But unfortunately, this politics of eternity isn't just confined to Russia and Ukraine. Snyder argues that it's being actively exported, especially to the US and the EU. And he talks about some pretty disturbing techniques being used to spread this ideology.
He does. It's something we need to be very aware of.
Okay, so how is this unfreedom, as Snyder calls it, spreading beyond Russia's borders? What should we be looking out for?
That's what we'll dive into next. It's a complex and unsettling picture, but understanding these tactics is the first step to resisting their influence. So one of the ways this unfreedom spreads is through support for far-right political movements in Europe.
You're talking about groups that also focus on this mythical past, the distrust of democratic institutions.
Exactly. They use this really emotionally charged rhetoric, often with a good dose of conspiracy theories thrown in. And scapegoating. You know, they paint this picture of a glorious past that's been stolen.
Yeah.
Stolen by immigrants, liberals, globalists, whoever.
Yeah.
And it's all about fueling resentment, division, which, of course, weakens democratic societies from within.
Sounds like it's straight from Putin's playbook.
It's the same basic formula. It's just adapted for different contexts. And what's really concerning is that these groups, they've been gaining traction in recent years.
Yeah.
They exploit anxieties about the economy, social divisions, all to their advantage.
So they're tapping into that same sense of uncertainty, that disillusionment we talked about earlier.
Exactly. When people are feeling lost and vulnerable, they're more likely to cling to simple explanations. Promises of going back to a better time, even if those promises are based on false narratives and dangerous ideologies.
And what about the U.S.? Snyder suggests we're vulnerable to this politics of eternity too, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Even though we have this long history of championing democracy, the U.S. is not immune. Snyder points to some pretty serious cracks in our foundation. Growing economic inequality, the political polarization, the rise of hyper-partisan media that just thrives on outrage and division.
So even in a country built on this idea of progress, opportunity, these same vulnerabilities still exist.
They do, and these vulnerabilities create fertile ground for the politics of eternity to take root. When people feel like the system is rigged, like no one's listening to them, they're more susceptible to these, well, simple solutions, even if those solutions are dangerous and ultimately harmful.
And this is where the rise of someone like Trump becomes really alarming, right?
Exactly. Snyder argues that Russia saw Trump as a useful tool, someone they could manipulate to weaken democracy, to sow chaos.
Hold on, you're saying they saw him as an asset in spreading their politics of eternity?
Think about it. Trump's entire persona, his rhetoric, it aligns perfectly with this ideology. The obsession with a mythical past, make America great again, the constant attacks on the media, fake news, demonizing opponents, constantly stoking division.
So his narcissism, his, fragile ego, his tendency towards conspiracy theories, all of that played right into Russia's hands.
It did. And whether he knew it or not is almost beside the point.
Right.
The fact is, his actions, his rhetoric, it undermined democratic norms, it eroded trust in institutions, and it created this chaotic environment where the politics of eternity can thrive.
He was practically a poster child for the things Snyder warns us about.
You could say that. And it's not just about Trump himself, it's about the bigger trend he represents. The rise of populism, the erosion of truth, the growing appeal of these simplistic, emotionally driven narratives that offer these easy answers to complex problems.
And this brings us back to that tactic we discussed. Implausible deniability.
Right. Think about how Trump used that constantly. The constant lies, the attacks on anyone who questioned him, the creation of this alternate reality where facts just didn't matter.
It was exhausting trying to keep up with all the lies and distortions. It felt like every day there was some new outrage, some new attack on truth and decency.
That's the point, to create a climate of confusion, exhaustion. So people give up trying to figure out what's real. And in that environment, the politics of eternity can flourish.
Because if nothing can be trusted, then anything goes. It's a free-for-all of manipulation and propaganda.
Exactly. And that's what makes Snyder's message so urgent. He's sounding the alarm, warning us that unless we actively resist this, we risk losing the foundations of freedom, democracy, that we take for granted.
So it's not about some abstract political theory. It's about the real possibility of our society sliding into authoritarianism oppression.
That's exactly it. He's saying the politics of eternity, it's not just some harmless nostalgia trip, it's a dangerous ideology, and it can have devastating consequences if we don't recognize it and actively resist it.
So what can we do? What are some steps we can take to counter this politics of eternity? It feels so overwhelming, like this giant wave crashing over us.
Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. Snyder does offer a way forward. And it starts with recognizing the problem, understanding the tactics they're using, and being willing to push back.
Okay, that's a start. But I need more. What does this resistance look like in practice? How do we fight back against something as insidious and pervasive as the politics of eternity?
That's where things get interesting. And that's what we'll explore next.
Okay, so we've uncovered this whole politics of eternity thing. We see how it works. We know it's spreading. What do we do about it? It feels huge, overwhelming.
It is big, yeah. But Snyder's point is we can't afford to just sit back. The politics of eternity, it feeds on us being apathetic, ignorant. So step one's awareness, like what we're doing right now.
So just by listening to this deep dive, we're on the right track. I like where this is going.
You are. Because you're already thinking critically about these narratives, these tactics. But it can't stop there. We have to be informed, question the information we're taking in, and realize we all have a role in shaping how things go politically.
So it's more than just reading the news, voting. We've got to be actively defending truth and democracy.
That's it. Fact-checking, finding different perspectives, calling out lies when we see them, supporting those institutions that, uphold democratic values.
Sounds like you're saying we got to be guardians of truth.
Exactly. It's not waiting for someone else to fix it. It's realizing we all have a part to play to protect our freedoms.
That's powerful, but honestly a bit daunting. Seeing how entrenched these forces are. What's Snyder's advice for folks who feel overwhelmed or don't even know where to start?
He stresses individual responsibility, starting small. Fact-check that article before you share it. Challenge a friend who's, repeating something iffy. Support a local journalist or some organization fighting for truth and accountability.
So building those habits, thinking critically, being engaged in our daily lives, not waiting for some big heroic moment, but just these constant little pushes back against the tide.
Exactly. Every choice, every action we take shapes the world. And by choosing consciously, being informed, we can help tip the scales towards, truth, freedom, a better future.
Like a ripple effect. Each little act of resistance makes a ripple, and eventually maybe a wave of change.
Love that analogy. It captures what Snyder's getting at. It's not waiting for rescue. It's realizing we have power, each of us, to make a difference, and then we act on that.
Kind of inspiring, isn't it? We're not powerless against this.
That's the key. We have a choice. Accept the narratives being shoved at us or actively shape a different reality.
Lots to chew on there. Really appreciate you breaking it all down. This has been eye-opening, to say the least.
Happy to do it. And for anyone listening, if you want to go deeper, check out The Road to Unfreedom. It's challenging but hopeful, like a roadmap for this crazy world we're in.
And that's our deep dive for today. If you found this insightful, hit that subscribe button. You won't miss future episodes.
And share it. The more folks thinking critically about this, the better we can build a future where truth and freedom win.
You'll find a link to purchase the book in the show notes.